Hello, everyone. Welcome. I am super excited that you're here tonight. This is Left Bank Books welcomes acclaimed author David Levithan, who will discuss his new middle grade novel, The Mysterious Disappearance of Aiden S., as told to his brother. Levithan will be in conversation tonight with best-selling children's author Jennifer L. Holm. Left Bank Books is St. Louis's oldest independent bookstore. We are nearly celebrating 52 years. We would like to thank all of our supporters, the supporters of David and Jenny, and everyone for their outpouring of love for our bookstore. We have adapted and are still bringing you the things that you love the most about Left Bank Books, with curbside pickup and delivery to anywhere in the country, anywhere in the world. We are happy to be able to bring our event series virtual. We believe that events are a way to expand your mind and bring in new thoughts to make the world a better place. And this book will definitely expand your mind. We hope that you enjoy this event, and we hope that you support Left Bank Books by purchasing a signed copy for you or for all of your friends at left-bank.com. And I will show you the signature. Purchasing a signed copy of the book from Left Bank Books allows us to keep our bookstore and staff here, and it allows us to keep this event series going. So thank you for your support. We need your support. I'm Shane Mullen. I'm the events coordinator for Left Bank Books. I help produce our hundreds of author events each year with a fantastic team here in St. Louis. We will be taking questions from the audience at the end of the event, so you can type your questions as a comment at any point in time throughout the event. We will get to those at the end, but you can type them up and show your enthusiasm for the event. And be sure to follow Left Bank Books on Facebook to be notified about all of our fantastic virtual events. About tonight's book, The Mysterious Disappearance of Aiden S., as told to his brother. New York Times bestselling author David Levithan takes young readers on a twisting journey through truth, reality, and fantasy and belief. Aiden disappeared for 6 days. 6 agonizing days of searches and police and questions and constant vigils. Then, just as suddenly as he vanished, Aiden reappears. Where had he been? The story he tells is simply impossible, but it's the story Aiden is sticking to. His brother Lucas wants to believe him, but Lucas is aware of what other people, including their parents, are saying, that Aiden is making it all up to disguise the fact that he ran away. When the kids in school hear Aiden's story, they taunt him, but still Aiden clings to his story, and as he becomes more of an outcast, Lucas becomes more and more concerned. Being on Aiden's side would mean believing in the impossible. But how can you believe in the impossible when everything and everybody is telling you not to? Booklist says, a superb story. Levithan's first book for middle grade readers is an unqualified success. And Kirkus Reviews says, engaging. The matter-of-fact inclusion of LGBTQ plus characters is noteworthy. A thought-provoking title for sophisticated readers. And about tonight's speakers. When not writing during spare hours on weekends, David Levithan is editorial director at Scholastic and the founding editor of the Push imprint, which is devoted to finding new voices and new authors in teen literature. His acclaimed novels, Boy Meets Boy, The Realm of Possibility, started as stories he wrote for his friends for Valentine's Day, something he's done for the past 22 years and counting, that turn themselves into teen novels. He's often asked if the book is a work of fantasy or a work of reality, and the answer is right down the middle. It's about where we're going and where we should be. Jennifer L. Holm is a New York Times bestselling children's author and the recipient of 3 Newbery honors for her novels Our Only May Amelia, Penny from Heaven, and Turtle in Paradise. Jennifer collaborates with her brother, Matthew Holm, on 2 graphic novel series, the Eisner Award-winning Baby Mouse series and the best-selling Squish series. She lives in California with her husband and 2 children. And now, without further ado, I am so happy and proud to welcome for the evening David Levithan and Jennifer L. Holm for Left Bank Books. If everyone at home would please help me with a giant round of applause so that they can hear from wherever you are to wherever they are. Hello.
Hello.
Hi.
Thank you, Shane, for having us. That was such a great introduction. That was lovely. Oh my gosh.
It's a lot to live up to. I mean, like, our readers have to be sophisticated. We have to say something meaningful about, like, the meaning of life, I think you said. It's a lot of pressure.
Well,
but
I want everyone at home to raise their hand if one of your books, David, has seriously made them feel more whole as a human being. So me.
Well, I would say the same of Jenny's books too. No, it's very, very sweet. I also liked the one of the themes of the book is like belief and faith and truth, and yet you felt the need to prove that it was a signed copy, which I really appreciate. It ain't just the sticker. Kids, we have a signature inside. So that's good. That's good. You're really putting it all out. Full transparency from Left Bank Books. We appreciate that.
And it wasn't me signing it either. So,
right.
Yeah.
It would have been a much neater, precise signature. It had not been me, that's for sure.
Well, this book, it's unbelievable. It's amazing. I read a lot of books, obviously. But when I just started reading, I was just sitting on the couch downstairs, and it's probably the first book in maybe 10 years where I just sat and read it straight through, didn't get up, ignored my children. When they were nagging me to make them lunch, I told them, too bad, they're old enough, figure it out. It blew my mind a little bit. And so let's start with some just like sort of top level thing. You know, did anything in real life inspire this book? Because it felt so real. It really felt like I just pictured myself in this book.
The premise of basically a brother disappearing for 6 days and then coming back and telling a story that nobody believes, I started with the premise, but I think I made some crucial decisions in starting the book that really helped a lot, and I think helps make it feel that way. I mean, the first was I never plot out books. I never plot out anything. I'm good with other people. In my day job, I plot other people's books, but my own books, I write them to figure out what happened. And in this case, this book, because there's so much unknown, the fact that it was unknown even to me, the writer, I think helps draw that uncertainty. And then obviously it was the as told to his brother part of the title that really, to me, is what the book is about. And then I decided I have this idea, the question, what would it be like to return? And again, it's not really a spoiler to say that Aiden, basically he leaves, and when he comes back, he says that he was in a fantasy world or an alternative world. Is he lying? Is he telling the truth? That's what the book is about. And again, honestly, at the beginning, I did not know whether he was lying or telling the truth. And if Jenny and I do our job tonight, you will not know whether he's lying or telling the truth by the time it's over. But the easy way to say, oh, what do you want to explore here would have been to tell the story from that point of view of the kid who either had or did not have this experience. But I was much more interested in his brother who didn't have the experience. And what is it like when somebody comes back with this impossible story and you have to choose whether or not to believe them? And so I think a lot of the book is basically Lucas processing and struggling and trying to piece together the evidence. And I was right there alongside him trying to piece it together too.
I mean, I thought it was so brilliant to do the point of view from the little brother. And I just felt like this was sort of like a love letter to sibling bonds. Do you have any siblings? I actually don't know this about you.
Yes, I have a brother. Interestingly, in the context of this book, in the book, Lucas is the younger brother by a year. In real life, I am the older brother by 4 years. So it's not a similar dynamic.
Well, I mean, the whole brother thing was just amazing. So can I ask, who are you more like? Which character, Aiden or Lucas?
I mean, the quintessential author answer would be I'm pretty much half of each of them, which is probably the truth. I think I'm probably a little more Lucas than Aiden. I don't think I would be as adventurous or as headstrong, or at least as a kid. I would not have been as adventurous and or as headstrong as Aiden. I think I would have been more the observer, which is what Lucas really is he's sort of taking everything in. So I guess I will, even though I share traits of Aiden's, I would say I'm more like Lucas.
Nice. So one of the reasons I felt like it was so realistic was because, and this isn't really giving anything away, Lucas disappears. Aiden disappears, and the whole town goes nuts looking for them, as you would if you have a child who mysteriously disappears. You know, your mind goes to the very worst thing that could have happened, and when he reappears, everybody's really befuddled. And I thought the way you handled all the realistic elements, like how did the police react, the school, the mommy blog, the mommy boards. Did you actually did you do research? Did you talk to police to how would they actually react in a situation like this? Because I thought it was very nuanced. It wasn't, it was very nuanced in terms of how did they deal with children when things go wrong?
Yeah, no, I certainly had some conversations with people and did some reading about sort of what would happen in this situation, because again, it is something that I like to do, which is even if I have a speculative book, I like to write it as if it's pure realism. And so I knew that for this book to work, it really has to be grounded in realism. That again, it has to be so much our world, with the one exception of this one boy who is saying, oh, by the way, I was just in another world. So that really fed into it. And a lot of it is about the conversations that the family has and the concern, because again, I think the easy thing to do would have been to write it as a Boy Who Cried Wolf book, that Aiden comes back and it's like a fantasy world and it's all about I don't believe you, you're lying. But instead, it's really about the concern. It's about, if you're a parent or, again, one of the police officers, you're not saying, no, you're lying. You're saying, why is he lying? What is he hiding? What is underneath this story? And being very concerned in a very caring way about it. And that's really what I wanted to convey, that if Aiden is not telling the truth, he is covering something, obviously, that could have been disturbing or could have been something to be concerned about. And so you have to weigh both of those possibilities as you're writing it.
So the parents were great. Their dynamic, obviously you guys are going to have to read it, but it felt so realistic. They're very kind of up and down. And the way they react to what Aiden is saying. I don't even know how you wrote that. It was amazing. Just getting into both. Because mom and dad are very different about how they are approaching it. How they manage it. Did you have people that you kind of were putting in your head of how they figured it out? Is your mom in the other room? Just kidding.
She is, but other side of the house. No. No, I think honestly, and I would love to talk to you about this, because you and I, we started about the same time writing. We have a similar number of books under our belt. And I do think, and I will say, I just want to get in here, that Jenny's new book is amazing. It's incredible. And it's called The Line of Mars. You should buy a copy from Left Bank Books tonight. And it was interesting reading it, knowing we would talk, because it is about a found family living in a lava cave in Mars, in a settlement in Mars, but very isolated. And there are a lot of questions of truth and belief and faith within it. And it's interesting, but to your question, I think one of the things I loved about the book is you also, the adult dynamic is just as intriguing as the kid dynamic, and the adult stories and backstory is inextricable from what the kids are dealing with. And I think what I would say is that that's from writing a lot of books, is that I find now that when I started off, if I wanted to have a kitchen table scene, I only really cared about what the narrator was thinking at the kitchen table. It was just the scene would be so much, in this case, his head, and it would just be that his feelings, his interactions, and then he'd go off to his room. But now when I write a kitchen table scene, like I really want to understand every single person at the table and what they're feeling and what their motives are and what their relationship with each other is, so that basically everything they say is informed by this history or this dynamic they have. And there are definitely some of my favorite scenes in Mysterious Disappearance are those kitchen table scenes where it is just the family trying to figure it out, and there's a lot of things said, there are a lot of things not said. Aunt Brandy, another family member, sort of comes in to the mix, and whenever you have an outsider in there, that totally changes the kitchen table dynamic, and I wanted to show that change when you had that one other person there. So I think for me, it was interesting, and obviously being older, I can relate to the parents more than when I was in my 20s writing. And so I wanted it to be that you can read this book and you can actually understand every single person's point of view, even when they are diametrically opposed to each other or seem diametrically opposed.
And I think it's so smart, because I think kids pay attention to that. Like as a child, I was always obsessed with what the adults were doing. And so I think you're just giving them a window into watching all these adult reactions. So speaking of fantasy, can you talk a little bit about your inspiration for Avenue? So this is the fantasy world, which our character has disappeared to, and we don't know what happened. And it's pretty incredible. Do you want to?
Thank you.
It was brilliant.
I mean, it is, again, without giving too much away for what Aiden's story is, and it was very interesting, because the first event I did was with my friends Nick and Zach, who write the series The Adventurers Guild, and they're like major fantasy geeks, and like they write fantasy, they read fantasy, whereas I am not. I like fantasy, but I read widely, I write widely. And it was interesting because they really were like, let's talk about the world building. And I was like, again, because I didn't really plot this, I only thought about Venue when Aiden was talking. And so I discovered it along with Lucas and sort of all the details. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. Well, that makes sense. And it was very clear to me. And I think the thing that Nick and Zach were like, this totally plays with the tropes, and I didn't even intentionally play with the tropes, was the notion, again, I don't think it's giving anything away. Usually in Portal Fantasy, when somebody falls into another world, major things happen. Like 7 days later, they become the king. Like it's like they find a sword. And that is not what happens to Aiden. Aiden, I mean, says that he's fallen into this world, and he decides to convey this very ordinary life in an extraordinary world. And again, it's the question of, well, does that mean that he's telling the truth because he's not telling a bold story and coming back and saying, I was king? Or is it just that he's making it up as he's going along, not unlike his author, and just is throwing things together and is just waiting to be caught? Again, and either one had to be possible.
And I think how Lucas, the younger brother, responds to Aiden when he talks about disappearing into this fantasy world. I thought it felt so realistic, like a kid. I mean, I dog-eared it and circled it, and the boys share a room and they chit-chat before bed. Mm-hmm. And I love that, Lucas asked, what did you eat there? Like, that is obvious. That is so, like, that's what I would want to know too. Like, right. What did you eat? Was it good? And you had like this very, very like rich, just very rich backstory about what he did eat there. And the other little bit was like, I never even thought of this. Okay, so like, I think they were onto something about asking you a little bit about the fantasy world, because he also asked, like, did they speak English? Like, right. That was so clever, really, really clever. So like if you, so a lot of your books have been made into movies, which is wonderful and very exciting. So if you were casting this movie, would you have actors in mind? Although they're kind of young, so it might be hard. But
yeah, like
or maybe the parents. Could you cast the parents?
Oh man, What's funny, what this gets to is that, I don't know if we've had this conversation before, that I don't picture anything when I'm writing. So I'm like a completely unvisual writer. And so a lot of my friends, they cast in their heads, or they know who people are. And for the most part, I could not tell you what the parents look like. I can tell you what Lucas or Aiden look like. They're just people to me. I have a sense of them, but I don't know what they look like. The one exception I will say, and it is for the most obvious reason, is Aunt Brandy was named because at the moment she first appeared, I was listening to Brandy Carlisle on my iTunes. And so I was like, I need a name, Aunt Brandy. And like immediately in my head, like Aunt Brandy became Brandy Carlisle. And so like, so it was very weird to picture one character, but not really necessarily the others. So I don't know. I honestly, I'm very bad at the casting question because, yeah.
It has to be a movie. I'm sorry. Steven Spielberg, looking at you, buddy. What has been the reaction from kids when they read it, when they talk to you? Are their minds as blown out as mine is still? Like,
I mean, it's interesting. I just did earlier today. I did my first book club with a bookstore. So it was the first time where all the kids had read the book, so we could actually talk in a way that you and I cannot talk right now.
Introducing it, yeah.
So it was fascinating because we were talking a lot about choices and trust. We were talking a lot about the ending, so I can't talk about that. But I think that they did get the belief. And I think it was interesting. One of the things we talked about the most, which again is not a spoiler at all, is that the question of, so again, obviously Aiden disappears into this fantasy world and then comes back, or so he says. And so the question was, if you opened up a dresser, a wardrobe, whatever, and saw basically a fantasy world, would you go in? Or would you run and get your friend, or run and get your brother, or run and get somebody else? And so we had a really interesting conversation about what would your reaction be if you were posed with this situation, which I love. So there have been a lot of hypotheticals we've talked about.
Yeah, and I don't know what I would have done when I was a kid either. I was a bit of like well-behaved, like not very adventurous. Except at home, I wasn't very adventurous. We played in the woods and stuff. But I mean, it's such an interesting like concept. Like, if you could go to another world, would you, or would you be too nervous to leave your bedroom? Like, I actually don't know. Although right now after COVID, I'll go anywhere. Fine.
Well, have you been getting a lot of questions about, would you move to Mars? I mean,
yeah, well, I mean, I feel like we're living on Mars now. Mars is going to be very isolating. So we are actually living real-time Mars. I would not want to live on Mars, but that's because we've just lived for it the last year. All right. So I dog-eared so many things in this book. Is that okay? I'm like,
oh my God, totally.
I'm one of these people who writes in my books and dog-ears them. You're never going to sell the books that I own at like an antiquarian. So one of the things that Aiden says to Lucas, so I love that you set up this whole thing about how kids communicate to each other. Like, they don't just have these like spontaneous conversations just to like move the plot along. It felt very realistic about when children talk to each other. And I think the whole like talking before bed has always been like a thing with my own kids and with my brothers growing up. And part of it is just a way to like get out of going to sleep, but also it becomes like this thing where you have these like explore these real truths. And I'm going to just read a little line you wrote. I could hear Aiden turn over in his bed to face me. And he said, because it was just life. There wasn't any quest. There wasn't any treasure to find or secret to unlock. It was like living on a farm. Only the farm happened to be in a completely different world. Like, did you spend time on farms? I mean,
no.
I mean, it was just so clever. I don't know. Did you find it a lot different writing for a middle grade audience than a YA audience?
I mean, honestly, no. I think that, again, because I'm so in the story, it's like, I think maybe if I had told it in third person, I would have been a little more confused, but because I was in Lucas's head and Lucas is 11, like it did not, I did not suddenly veer towards YA at any moment. Like I was very, very much in the zone of Lucas's head. So the other thing, and again, I said this at my book launch, and like a lot of the authors in the audience were like, whoa, and like their mind was blown, which is just very funny. But as you know very, very, very well, I'm also an editor, and I edit middle grade as well as YA, and so I'm very familiar with both. And for whatever reason, when I started writing middle grade, I decided the way that would be easier for me would be if I made my font size bigger. And so that basically it looks more like a printed middle grade book. So I was always very cognizant of the fact that I was writing middle grade just because the type was bigger, which is the same as when you're a reader, you know that it's the age level from the size of the type. So strangely, that has helped me a lot. And I just literally yesterday finished the first draft of my next middle grade. And that too, like having those parameters and that font size definitely kept me on a track in my mind thinking middle grade, even when I wasn't in a first person voice. It's very strange, but
my mind is blown also. That is so clever, because I just think that and it's a funny thing because people have a lot of opinions about lengths of books. But I felt like this kind of a length is so good and solid for, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. This is like their happy spot. Of course, they're going to dive into, every once in a while, like a nice chunky Harry Potter. But I think this is like very comforting. All right, before we we're going to go to Q&A. But before we do that, since we kind of brought up movies, do you have any film updates on anything in the David Levithan universe?
Nothing that has been announced. I mean, there's one. I mean, nothing. There's nothing imminent.
But you just had a movie
Dash and
on
Lily, yeah. Which
on
I mean, like I could co-star on Dash and Lily for a few years, so I'd be very happy. I mean, I'm so thrilled with how it turned out. But definitely, there's one other thing that is being shopped around right now, which I'm very much hoping happens. But that is all I can say right now. I do want to ask. I have to ask you one line of Mars question, because again, what I loved. It's so funny that you honed in on sharing a room, because obviously sharing a room is a very big part of the dynamics, the sibling dynamics of this book. And in fact, we start with sort of the feeling of betrayal that a sibling has left and another sibling has been rotated in who snores. But especially considering, again, our how much I know about your family through your work, especially the Sunny series, I am fascinated that you did choose, like me, to write from the point of view of the youngest, even though you yourself are not the youngest. So I'm curious about that. Why you chose to tell this story from the point of view of the youngest person there, rather than choosing a middle sibling?
So yeah, I am the middle sibling out of 5. I ended up going with the youngest. It was a little bit inspired by my own kids. My daughter Millie is 4 years younger than her older brother Will, and there's this painful dynamic where you watch, like, the younger kid desperately wants to know what's going on and they want to understand the world, and they're always kind of following around the older kids, just trying to fit in and trying to be part of the fun. And so I think and it becomes like a really good vehicle to like show the world in general. Yeah. So yeah, it was fun. I was never the baby. Matt's the baby, so he had a good life. So no, I was the responsible middle child. But, all right. Well, I am so excited to hear some questions from the audience. So we're going to let Shane is going to be our fabulous Q&A guy.
I'm back. First off, I'm so excited about this conversation. I asked in the audience Q&A or in the comments if, like, would you go through the wardrobe or dresser or whatever the case may be? And Michelle responded, I will go get my sister, and she would make me go with her into the other world. So
that's funny.
And I think that would probably have been the only way that I would have the courage to go through into another world, is if I went and got like my brother or sister, who were always much braver than I was.
Mhm.
Now I think the tables are a little bit turned, because I'd be like, go, like.
Right.
Yeah, when I was a child, I think I would have had to have been forced to go through by one of my siblings. So, yeah. I want to ask before we get into the audience Q&A, but audience, be sure to type up questions, because we have a lot of time to ask a bunch of questions for either David or Jenny. So now is the time to think of any of those things that you've been curious about for a while. My question for you, David, is you mentioned a lot of books in the kind of letter to the reader that were a big part of my childhood as well. And you mentioned that they were a big part of your childhood. And I didn't actually know that there was a portal fiction category. I had no idea. So I'm wondering if you went through and reread any of those before you endeavored into this book.
Amusingly, I didn't know there was a category called Portal Fantasy until reviews started telling me that I'd written into it. I was like, oh, interesting. And the answer, I mean, so for those who don't have the access to the letter that you refer to, I mean, when I knew that I was writing a middle grade, I really wanted to harken back to From the Mixed Up Files of Mrs. Baisley Frankweiler, The Weston Game, The Mysterious Disappearance of Leon. I mean, Noel, or is it Noel? I mean, Leon. And Leon, and obviously Narnia and Wrinkle in Time. And so, but I decided not to reread them because I wanted it to be based on my memory of them more than their actual plots. I mean, I told the story in my launch where I loved Narnia, and then one of my classmates in high school did an author project on C.S. Lewis and explained to the many Jews in the class what Narnia was about, and we were like, "Oh my God, really?" And that I was like, "Oh, that's a little less fantastical than I thought." So I was like, "But I want to go back to how I felt about it before it was explained to me." So yeah, so I basically decided to base it on my memory of them and not reread them. I've read From the Mixed Up Files of Mrs. Baisley Frankweiler many times in adulthood because I used to teach it. So that one I was extremely familiar with. The others not as much.
I definitely haven't read any of these books since I was a child. So yeah.
For the book I just finished, I did reread Harriet the Spy, which oh my God, it so holds up, but it's like there are sentences in there that you're like, you could never get away with this in middle grade in a million years right now. Like, it's just.
Does it feel like historical fiction when you're reading it now? Like the New York of her?
I mean, not really, because it's such a very specific neighborhood, and like there's no reliance on technology or anything like that. It really is about having a notebook and spying on the people around you. So it doesn't feel as dated as I feared it would.
Interesting.
I believe there's a new biography of the author that I really want to read.
It is literally on the top of my pile next to my bed right now. It is the next one I want to read. So yeah.
Oh, fantastic. So we have a little bit of a silent audience tonight, but they're watching, so that's good. But if you have any questions, Jennifer and I will kind of bounce back and forth on some other questions. I am always super curious because I know that you are an editor and you're a writer. So when I always want to know, like, how much you feel like it's like how much do you hate that you have to have an editor, and how much do you love that you get to have an editor?
Yeah, I mean, very luckily, I learned I mean, it was intuitive to me, but my friend Nancy Hinkle has been the editor for most of my books, and she even left Random House and left publishing, but she still freelance edits my books, which is amazing. And I love it. I mean, it's such a weird reference because it generally is a movie that nobody remembers, but there was this William Hurt movie called The Doctor, where he basically is this high-powered doctor and like has to learn how to be a patient when he gets sick because there's no way that he can operate on himself. And like I feel the same is true of writer editors, that there's no way I can operate on my own book. It would be as stupid as giving myself heart surgery. So, but I will say I'm very lucky because Nancy has an extraordinarily similar editorial style to me. And I found that very easy to jive with. I've had one or two instances when I have not worked with her and I've worked with an editor whose style is like diametrically opposed to my style. And that was very, very, very hard. So I think finding somebody you're in a groove with is the key to doing both.
I love to read series, and it always, or like, especially like when I follow an author, whether they write series or not, but sometimes it's really obvious when their editor, or when they either switch editors, or when their editor stops like working, like when the author like kind of is like, I don't need you anymore. I don't need a good editor. Like, and it's like, no, you really do. Like, you really, really do. It's such a, it's a very important part of the book writing process. That
yeah. I mean, I am lucky. I have only in my entire career of 28 years, I've only once in my entire career had an author who basically did not want to be edited. And I was just shocked. I was like, I can't understand. Like literally, I had notes to send and his agent said, don't bother, the book is done. And I was like, okay.
Wow.
So it was a very strange situation, and it is not anyone that we would be familiar with. But otherwise, I think most authors are very grateful for whatever insight. Even if the editor is wrong, they can still point you to things that you didn't see otherwise, or they might be right that something's wrong and wrong about what the answer is, but that's okay. Like it gets you to think in a different way and sort of takes you outside the book and back in again, hopefully in a very productive way.
Michelle has a question. What are some of the movies that have been inspired by David's books? So I feel like this is like a trivia question for you, David. Like I don't know if I can list them all.
I've been lucky in that, I mean, that as we talked about, Dash and Lily was just a Netflix show based on Dash and Lily's Book of Dares, which I wrote with Rachel Cohn. And then we can just go down the David Levithan, Rachel Cohn oeuvre. Nicanor's Infinite Playlist was the first and awesome. And then the answer that nobody would, the trick answer to the question is Naomi and Eli's No Kiss List was also adapted. It went straight to video back in the day when such a thing happened, and now is of course streaming. And then my book Every Day was adapted into a movie that I really love. So I've had 3 or 4 adaptations in that way. Although still one of my favorite adaptations of all time is that my book Two Boys Kissing was turned by the Twin Cities Gay Men's Chorus into a choral piece. Which is like, there are the adaptations that you hope for, and then there are the adaptation that never in a million billion years would you ever imagine. No writer in the history of writers has ever sat down and written a novel thinking this will be adapted into a choral piece, I'm sure. So that blew my mind.
Lovely. That's so lovely.
Yeah. Since I loved that book, is that able to be found on the internet?
Yeah, no, you should absolutely find it on the internet. I believe the score, which is by an amazing composer named Joshua Shank, I believe is on iTunes. And I think a lot of it, if not all of it, can be found on YouTube.
That is so cool.
Yeah. Just prepare to cry. You're going to cry a lot.
Oh.
Obviously.
You're like, tears. I can do tears.
Jenny, do you have any?
Well, kind of just jumping off the Two Boys Kissing, like what I really did love about this and is how just matter-of-factly you included LGBTQ characters. And it's something that, I mean, a review, you know, gave a nod to it, but it's something that kids notice. Like my own son is almost, he's 17, so he's a senior. And he had said that, I can't remember what it was. He had seen like a TV show or a movie, something, where they had done a similar thing. And he said, it was just so nice. It was just normal. Like, I didn't expect that. Like, and so it's just lovely. Like the whole, like, let's just treat it like, well, it is normal. It is life, but just I don't know. So thumbs up. It was just, I think kids need that,
Yeah.
They just need to see themselves reflected on the pages.
Right, and it does not have to drive the plot. I mean, again,
That's
identity,
what I was trying to get to. Yeah.
No, but in many of my novels, identity does drive the plot, or identity is the reason that I wrote the book in the first place. But with this one, yeah, it absolutely had to be present, and again, it's present in different ways, and I don't want to give too much away, but that was really important to me. And again, it's interesting because, again, not to tease the book that hasn't been signed up yet, but the book that I just finished is much more a queer middle grade book. Like, it's very much deliberately about queerness, about first relationships, about all these other things. And I keep joking to my friends that the second book is the one that everybody expected me to write in middle grade. The first one is not necessarily the one that they would have thought, oh, David's going to write a mystery about a disappearing boy going into a fantasy world. Probably is not. If you had that on your bingo card, you probably wouldn't have expected it to come through.
I didn't see it coming at all, to be honest.
So, but I love that. I love that again, it's still there. My sensibility is still there, but it is not the driver at all.
Yeah, I mean, it's lovely. It's just so lovely.
But I mean, Jenny, you certainly, nobody sort of necessarily thought that you were going to go to Mars. I mean, how did you feel to stretch into sort of, I mean, it's science fiction, but it also, with an emphasis on the science too, that it's sort of, you take a lot of the facts of Mars that we know and life on Mars and what life would be like for humans on Mars. So it feels realistic, even though it's science fiction, if that makes sense. Yeah. So what was it like for you to go out of your comfort zone and sort of try something different?
I mean, so I've written a lot of historical fiction, so I'm used to doing research. And so when I was first writing it, I thought, aha, this is going to be great. I can just make stuff up because it's the future. And then I decided I wanted it to be in grounded science. And so it was a pretty deep dive down the rabbit hole. And it's kind of the space society, the space industry is a pretty welcoming industry. I talked to a lot of people at NASA and people who work at SpaceX. I actually live in Orange County, which is like the original base for the aeronautics industry, and that's where SpaceX is. So a lot of aeronautics engineers still live around here, and like my old babysitter's brother works at SpaceX. So it sounds crazy, but we were just able to go in and take a tour and talk to them about the nuts and bolts of what going to space is like. I think the most interesting part was I also joined the Mars Society, which is like kind of like SCBWI for Mars enthusiasts. So it's a public-private partnership between, like, you have industry people like NASA and SpaceX and all of the suppliers who are building things to go to space, but then you have just like fans who go. And what was really interesting was just actually talking to people less about like, all the cool experiments we're going to do when we get here, like not pure science, but how are we going to get there? Like after we get there, what's it going to be like to live? And so talking to engineers about the realities of living on Mars, like where we will live, like probably, it's pretty likely we're not going to live on the surface because there's radiation, it's cold, it's windy, it's pretty much a death trap. So living underground is actually a safe bet. And just like what kind of people will go. We're not going to necessarily want to be sending like very theoretical, intellectual people. We need people who are like, who can like unclog a toilet, who can like cook, who know structural engineering, who know electricity, who know how to like boot up a solar panel. And there's all these experiments sort of simultaneously going on in the world, preparing people to go to Mars. And one of the one of the programs is kind of, they're practicing going to Mars by living in the desert. And I talked to the woman who runs it, and she said, the thing about when we finally do go to Mars, we're not going to send people who are very singular. We're not just going to send somebody who is a biologist. They're going to have to know how to do everything, because if that person dies, everybody's going to have to know how to do all of their duties. So when she said that, I'm like, oh, that's going to be a pretty dangerous trip. So it was a really interesting deep dive. And I think the sweetest little update to it now was one of the doctors. Like, I actually consulted quite a few like physicians who do space medicine, which is its own field. Who knew? Huh. Dr. Lindgren, he's with NASA, and he was just chosen to go to the International Space Station next year. So very so cool. Yeah.
He's like, if I have to quarantine, might as well go up in space and do it.
He's like, I'm out of here.
Right. Lockdown, all right.
I'm going to go have fun.
Wow. I've been reading a lot of space books this past year, so I am adding your book to my list.
You will love it.
Oh.
Yeah.
And we're in a great time for space. I mean, we're probably in like the new golden age for space. We just sent a new rover, just landed 2 weeks ago on Mars. Percy, also known as Perseverance, and is sending back photos. I mean, it's a thrilling time to be going back to space. So.
Yeah. My partner and I watch a lot of space things. The Expanse is like regularly playing.
My husband loves The Expanse. Yeah.
Yeah. Yep.
Check this out.
Oh,
when I read about the Mars rover, I was like, God, Jenny's publicist is really good. Like,
I know, she sorted it out perfectly.
Exactly. She's like, we got to get that rover up there in time for this book's release.
Same month, practically.
People are going to talk about Mars. Yeah.
So when both of you aren't reading books in your, like, the areas that you are kind of writing, so like for maybe the adult audience that's watching, do you have any fantastic adult books that you've been loving recently?
So I'm terrible. So I read a lot of romance. I think it's like
not terrible.
That's
no.
great.
I mean, it's great. I mean, it's like the sorbet to cleanse my palate. So I'll show you my office. This is my. Let me twist my desk. Can you see my picture on the wall? It is. Hang on. It is the original art.
Oh my God.
School kids love it. It's the original art from this Harlequin intrigue. A Teaspoon of Murder. Remember when it was very Magnum PI,
Wow.
Yeah. So I just read a lot of romance. Although I have not read the series that the TV show was based on, that everybody's talking about.
Bridgerton.
Yeah. I did go through a little Regency thing a few years ago, but so I'm probably not the right person to ask. I bet David has more like contemporary stuff.
I mean, and I know I don't want to know the answer.
Mm-hmm.
I genuinely don't. So don't ruin it for me, because I totally now want to write a quest novel about a woman who loves like a romance novel so much that she has to find the art where it is and then like get it for her home. So I'm hoping that you drove across the country to find it. You went to like 200 rummage sales, like. Yeah, but anyway, because that is amazing. Of course, I'm like, what adult books have I read lately? I've mostly been reading. I've been reading a lot of poetry, because that's what my attention span has been going. And so some of my favorite books from last year were works of poetry. There's a book called Catrachos by Roy Guzman, which is incredible. He's a queer Honduran American poet, and just like, they're extraordinary poems. I loved Nelly Diaz's post-colonial love poem. I really liked novel-wise. I loved Hamnet, which I was not expecting. It's about Shakespeare's wife, and I thought it would be sort of a historical romp, but it's actually really about grief and their son Hamnet, who had passed away. So those are the ones that have come to mind. I have a very big stack. I also have had a lot of adult things that I've read lately that I haven't loved. So I'm like, I will, but if I can cheat, I'm just going to pivot anyway, because you can't help me from making a YA recommendation. I do have to say, I just finished Melinda Lowe's Last Night at the Telegraph Club, and it is amazing. Like, if you love queer YA, you must read it. It is set in the 50s and basically about a Chinese American girl who basically falls in love with one of her female classmates, and they keep escaping together to the same nightclub and just find an alternate world inside this nightclub. And it's so much about sort of found queerness and sort of how to define yourself, even though the whole world at that time really did not want you to define yourself as you wanted to be defined. It's like, it's a masterpiece. Like, it's amazing how she pulled it off.
Did that just come out recently?
Yeah, it just came out in January.
Nice.
Yeah. And my copies are across the room. Otherwise, I would hold it up. But yeah, I need to get around to reading that because I haven't yet. But you have me completely sold on it because I was like sold on it anyway. But
right. I mean, it's Melinda, so but really, truly, talk about world building. It just takes you right in there, and you care about these characters so much.
Mm-hmm. Alan wants to know: is there much rivalry between Aiden and his brother? So we can get back to talking about the book a little bit.
Okay, no, let's.
Yeah.
It's interesting. There isn't as much. I mean, there's the usual sort of. Is it the usual dynamic, or am I just where they like each other, but at the same time, like, the younger brother is the tag along. The older brother likes to play some tricks on him every now and then. And then part of the reason that we don't know whether Aiden can be trusted is that Aiden has told stories in the past and has convinced his brother of things that haven't been true. And so I think they genuinely get along. Like, I think there is a respect there as much as there can be a respect between an 11 and a 12-year-old. So I don't think they have a bad relationship at all, but I do think this intentionally tests it. I mean, because they've never really been put in the clutch before. They've never been in a situation where they've had to actually rely upon each other. And so it's the question of what will happen when they do have to rely on each other.
I think 11 and 12 is like a really good age for brothers, like, because you aren't to that kind of high school level where there is kind of that, like, even a year difference is going to cause more rivalry. But yeah, they four brothers get along very well. Yeah. Alan leads our Gay Men's reading group, and they have read your books a number of times.
Awesome.
Actually, I know that I think the last one they read was Two Boys Kissing. Probably wrong about that. They probably read something else recently, but yeah. I actually went to that group because I was so in love with that book.
Oh.
And now you know you didn't even have to read the book. You could have just listened to the choral piece.
Oh, I know. Well, I don't think the choral piece, I mean, it may have existed when, because I know that, I think the group read it when that was in hardcover. I think they jumped on that one right away. So, trying to think of what else I'm curious about, because there are so many things, but I don't want to, like you said, spoil it. I want to talk about the world, like the not the fantasy world, the actual world, because we have quite a few kind of clues of, like, there's a woods, there's a pond, so like, I'm trying to imagine what you imagine the town to look like, and like,
is it Maplewood?
Right. Is it next door? I mean, it's interesting. Very, very deliberately, I did not actually pinpoint this one onto the map. Like, sometimes I'm very deliberate about where I put them, but this really, I wanted it to be sort of any town. Like, so I was very vague about that, which means basically I have no answer. But I picture it. I mean, I picture it in a Northeast setting, probably, but again, I think as long as there are trees and a creek and a highway, it would fit. Because again, I wanted I didn't want it to feel regional. I wanted it to feel universal.
Do you think you will, because you said that your next book is middle grade, do you think you're going to kind of stick to middle grade for a while? Will you be putting out a picture book? Well, like where are you going like after this, do you think?
I mean, there is an as yet young adult book that is coming out in September.
Oh,
So, which is a collaboration with somebody I've never collaborated with before, but since it is as yet announced, I can't tell you who. I can only tell you it's coming out in September. So it's funny because I now feel that I'm juggling many different things. That I want to write middle grade and I want to write YA. I want to write solo, but I also want to write with other people. I've also started. I just adapted Ned Vicini's Be More Chill into a graphic novel, and I want to do more graphic work, which completely comes from my exposure to graphic novels as an editor. So I love the fact that there are so many different things. The hardest one to crack would be picture book. I've made one or two valiant attempts, but oh my God, they're so hard. So we'll see if that ever happens, because I have such respect for picture book writers. Because
I do
to say,
too.
yeah,
It's hard. Jeez.
Yeah, it like to get one that's just so good, like because there are some that are like great, there's some that are really good, there's some that miss, but like it's such a lovely world of like kids picture books. I find myself loving every single one that I pick up, but that's also because we have a brilliant team of children's specialists that are like, read this one.
Exactly. Yay! No, you need there's so many good ones out there, but you do need that guiding hand. I just totally did as they were announcing the Newbery and Caldecots, I was sitting there ordering all the winners of the Newbery and Caldecots that I had not read. So I was just looking at the Caldecots, and I just read the Exquisite, which is the biography of Gwendolyn Brooks, and it's just beautiful. It really, and again, in the abstract, I was like, a picture book about Gwendolyn Brooks? Like, I'm sure there are not many kids in America who are like, Mommy, you know what I'd really love to read tonight? But then you read it and you're like, wow, this is such a great story. And it will become a favorite of a kid, not because they know who she is ahead of time, but because they read this book. And that's exactly what a picture book should do. And I just admire it so much.
And that's why booksellers and librarians and we all fall in love with books, and then we tell people, yes, indeed, you do want to read a book about Gwendolyn Brooks.
Right.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank both of you for being here this evening. It is always such a pleasure to have you, David and Jenny. The next time you are in the area, we would love to have you at the store, and hopefully that will be soon rather than later.
Please.
No, thank you so much for having us. Again, I encourage everybody watching, please don't just get my book, get Jenny's book too. Buy it from Left Bank, because again, it's amazing that you do so many events and give the spotlight to so many authors. And again, the only way we have to repay you is to purchase books. So yes, everyone should.
Thank you. And the link is in the comments for both Jenny and David's books. So buy them now, buy them together. Think about that friend that you want to talk about with this book, because you will want to talk to a friend after you read these books. So I hope that you all have a fantastic evening, and hope that we will see you again really soon. Be sure to check out our events calendar at left-bank.com. We have some really, really, really fantastic events coming up for adults. We have Viet Nguyen. We have Ishiguro coming up that I'm really excited about. Elon Green. We have some really incredible events in March. So be sure to check out that calendar and keep it on your agenda. And thank you, David. Thank you, Jenny.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jenny.
Thank you, Shane.
All right. Good night.
Have a good night, everybody.